All right, welcome to Legal Tech Week for August 14th, 2020, in which our panel of legal tech journalists get together and some of us drink and some of us don't. Generally, we try and round up the week's news. So I'm Bob Ambrogi. I write the blog Law Sites. I'm a tech columnist for Above the Law, and I do the podcast Law Next. And let's all go around and introduce ourselves. Molly, you want to go first?
Sure. Molly McDonough. I'm a media strategist and communications consultant based in the Chicago area.
And Victoria?
Hi, my name is Victoria Hudgens. I'm a reporter with Legal Tech News, which is a publication owned by ALM. You'll sometimes see my byline on law.com, American Lawyer, and a few other ALM publications. And I write mostly about the intersection of law and technology, and I'm based in Philadelphia.
But of course, you're mostly known for being on Legal Tech Week every Friday. So.
That's my, yes, also, AKA I'm also a panelist on this.
Zach, how about you?
Hey there, everybody. I'm Zach Warren. I work with Victoria, editor-in-chief at Legal Tech News. Also find me at all those other various 30,000 ALM brands. And I represent the Midwest here, based out of Minnesota. Yeah.
Yay. And Joe Patrice.
Hey, everybody. Joe Patrice, Above the Law. I don't really have much else to say. Above the Law, I guess I also host Thinking Like a Lawyer as a podcast. I'm on this show, as you might have guessed since you're watching me, those sorts of things. Having fun watching the bar exam mostly this week. So,
yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, fun. Right?
It's never going to end.
One person's pain is another person's fun, I guess.
Yeah.
And Victor Lee.
Hi, everybody. I'm Victor Lee. I'm the assistant managing editor for the ABA Journal. I manage the Business of Law section, which covers business of law and technology. And my usual disclaimer is I do not speak for the ABA or the ABA Journal. And if you're interested in other organizations I do not speak for, there's a list on my website.
So I can't ask you. Last night, my wife asked me the question of why isn't the ABA solving the access to justice problem? You can't answer that, I guess, right? Why does it have to be Utah?
Well, no,
that's the question. Why Utah?
It's a complicated issue, and there's a lot of different moving parts, a lot of different, the ABA is not a monolithic organization. There's a lot of different types of lawyers, a lot of different types of people in it, and it's not, what some people, some people might think is a way to solve it might not be how other people solve it. And like any bureaucracy, there's always a process that we have to go through and we have to respect. And, it's not something that we can just be like, okay, go do it.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
So I have thoughts.
I know. I'm sure you do.
I won't get into too many of them, but as my most recent gig with the ABA was as editor and publisher, and I was there for a very long time. And like Victor said, that it's a complicated issue. It's also a complicated topic, and I think the ABA has been very good at working on one aspect, which is pro bono and volunteerism, and really working that into model rules and part of the ethics and responsibility of lawyers, and have that be part of the culture of lawyering. But what Bob wrote about this week, we can't volunteer our way out of the access to justice gap, was one of the comments, and it's going to take a much broader solution from all across, from the courts, the public policy, and the bar, working in concert or separately on different parts of it to really improve the issue, the problem.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to pick on the ABA really, although I've been critical of the ABA at times as well. But the ABA is a monolithic organization. There's a lot going on within the ABA to push this issue forward. I was probably most overtly critical back when they came out with their report on the future of the legal profession or whatever it was a couple of years ago, where the report was full of these amazing findings about the need for alternative forms of delivering legal services, the need for redefining, the alternative, what constitutes the practice of law, just all this great stuff. And then when it came down to actually making recommendations, I did feel like they kind of wimped out on that, and they could have done so much more. So, but I mean, speaking of that, I'll exercise a moderator prerogative and go with the story I wrote about this week, because I really do think this is, I think this is just huge, and that's the story of the fact that the Utah Supreme Court this week approved what it had proposed a few months ago, which is, it's not an understatement to say it's a sweeping set of regulatory changes in that state, beginning with the creation of this so-called regulatory sandbox, which will go for at least 2 years now. They set it up for 2 years. I was on a panel just this morning with Justice Dina Simonis from Utah, and he said could be longer than 2 years. Maybe 2 years isn't long enough to really test this out, but we'll start there. Where essentially they will be setting up this sort of mirror regulatory body, not the normal lawyer regulatory body, but a body to regulate and approve alternative legal service providers. And they don't have to be lawyers. They could be, they could be social workers. They could be social workers and lawyers teaming together. They could be tech companies. They could be tech products. The possibilities are really endless. And they're going to really focus on collecting metrics, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and seeing if it has an impact on access to justice in the state. They also at the same time approved a number of changes to the rules of professional conduct that are corollary to that, like, basically, getting rid of some of the rules of requiring, prohibiting non-lawyer ownership or investment in law practices. And basically getting rid of any kind of advertising rules whatsoever. This is huge. I think Arizona is probably not too far behind on doing something very similar. And of course, other states have been talking about this. But I think, this happening now, combined with, I think, some of the changes that we're seeing because of COVID-19 and the pandemic and all of that, I think we are really at a major inflection point in law, not just in legal technology, but in the overall way that legal services are delivered in this country.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you beat me.
I didn't have too much to add other than just, it seems like forever ago that we were talking about this as the big story of 2020, and then COVID happened, and then everything happened. But the fact that this is gaining traction, I think it's huge. There are so many different aspects to pick out of what you're just talking about there, Bob. But I think the parallel body is going to be one of the most interesting ones for me. What exactly that consists of, how innovative and really pushing the envelope they want to be, who it consists of. That you might have more information than I do, especially if you just talk to Monis today, but just seeing practically these details play out, it'd be a lot of speculation for me right now, but I'm just very interested to see how it would happen.
Yeah. We didn't get any more details today, really. He didn't say anything today much that you wouldn't have already heard. But
it's just interesting to me that, going back to past episodes of this show, it's not long ago that we were talking about states pulling back from these sorts of innovative, different approaches, like Washington getting rid of that LLT program. And just the idea that there isn't a trend right now, that different states are just going different directions and Utah is going a more positive one, which actually tracks, for those who aren't observers of it, it tracks Utah's reputation. I feel like every time I hear about something kind of forward looking as far as evolving law in these sorts of areas, it's always Utah. So they deserve some credit for that sort of thing.
Yeah. If Utah were a publicly traded company, I'd buy stock in it right now.
Yeah.
Well, I think the interesting thing about, because Joe mentioned the triple LT program in Washington, and my reporter covering this, Lyle, has been very good about keeping up on this kind of stuff. The devil's kind of in the details with these kind of things, but also it'll see, where we are now might not be where we are in 2, 3, 4 years, because with the triple LT program, what he found was that as judges started leaving the Washington Supreme Court, like ones that were supportive of the program, new judges came on that were more suspicious of the program, or didn't see the point of it, or they were more protectionist. So will that happen in Utah? I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe it will, maybe it won't, maybe it won't matter. But I do think it's interesting that, with the ethics will change. Is like with the I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the lifting the ban on fee shifting and whatnot, not fee shifting, fee sharing. That's going to stay. That's going to be part of the code even after the 2-year regulatory sandbox is up. So they're going to have that regulation on the books at least until they decide that they want to get rid of it and change it again. So that's a big thing. I mean, because that was one of the third rails for the longest time. It's like, if we share fees, with non-lawyers, and that's the end of the profession, because these people are going to come in with their unscrupulous ways and blah 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 blah.
A couple points there from Joe and Victor. One with Joe and the earlier comment about the ABA. The ABA sets model rules. It doesn't mean the states can't lead, and that's often what happens with model rules too. Is a state kind of demonstrates, or a jurisdiction demonstrates, that something can be done or needs to be addressed, or an issue, and then a model rule is developed. So I've been frustrated not seeing the states step up and do some of this experimentation and testing. So I'm very excited about Utah. I've seen some of the hedging because of Washington, especially on Twitter, some discussions. But the Utah approach is much more sweeping and much more open. The Washington Triple LT program was so narrow in focus and so limited, and there was no effort really to the time that once folks started to recommend expanding it, that's when they just shut it down instead. So instead of improving it and morphing it into something that works, they just shut it down. So I'm more hopeful with this approach, this kind of more open concept, this more transparent approach from Utah, that we'll see innovation and development that can be replicated elsewhere.
I think that part of what burdened the Triple LT program in Washington was that they tried to harness it with the same sort of complex regulatory structure that exists for the legal profession onto the Triple LTs. And that was really a way to appease lawyer opposition to the program. I mean, that's really the only reason they did. I mean, obviously you have to have consumer protections built in, but the interesting thing about the 2-entity structure in Utah is you can have an entirely different kind of a regulatory body with different goals and different aims. There was a woman on our panel today this was an Association of Professional Responsibilities lawyer panel I was on from the UK, who was talking about the fact that for some of these things, you just really need to completely deregulate or completely think differently about what regulation means for them if they're going to work. And I think that's something that lawyers in the United States are having a lot of trouble letting go of or getting their arms around.
Also, I think the Triple LT program got hamstrung in the sense that, anytime you start up a new program with all that training and all those regulations, it's going to cost money, and it might not. You might not see a return on it until for several years. But then it's a convenient excuse for people when they say, "Oh, well, this program costs so much money, and we're not seeing any return on it, so therefore we have to get rid of it." It's like, well, but you're gonna be running in the red probably for the first few years, but that becomes like a way to kind of press the off switch if you need it.
Yeah. And I forget whether I mentioned this, but for any of you who are in the audience who are new to watching this, we welcome you to engage with us in the chat, throw us any questions you have, and we're happy to take them on as we talk about these things.
Did we lose Victoria?
Victoria, your picture went
I'm
away.
here.
I don't know. Okay.
Oh, I'm here.
There you are.
I just had to respond to something very quick, but I am here.
Yeah. So what should we talk about next? I mean, Zach, there was a kind of a big, sort of industry acquisition news this week.
Sure. There were a few M&A deals this week that I thought were interesting. Thomson Reuters buying Case Lines is one. That's more UK centric, and Caroline's not here this week, so I'll pass on that one for now. There was NK and ZebraWorks, which I thought was interesting as a merger, but the one that was really sticking out to me was Reveal and NextLP. Reveal is an e-discovery company, especially when I talked with them, that has big plans. And I think the CEO, Wendell Gisa, would kind of admit that himself. Part of those big plans this week was bringing on NextLP. NextLP is an artificial intelligence company. They partner with pretty much most other e-discovery companies to license out their software at this point. But now they're coming in as a Reveal shop. The goal, at least both sides told me, is to kind of further integrate the products. And now that they're working for a common goal, be able to pretty much have AI all parts of the process and try and integrate it, not have it as a separate one-off. So I know Reveal is hoping that this really kind of propels them to the next level as one of the top players in e-discovery. And people basically, he said, if you give us a try, we think we have something to prove here. It'll bear itself out. We'll see if it happens, but I found the shoot for the moon very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Do you think the scorecard, I guess, is changing a little bit in terms of the lineup of who are the top players right now? I mean, we're about when's we're coming up soon on Relativity Fest. I think Relativity probably continues to be the big kahuna in this space. But are the prominent players changing?
At least the sense I get. I mean, just looking at funding figures, if nothing else. So many of these companies, including Reveal, have gotten at least 8-figure, sometimes coming up. I think Xtero got more than 9 figures in funding. And just that alone means your capabilities, not only for R&D, but for M&A, just skyrocket. So while I think Relativity still has the most usage, there's definitely some firepower behind everybody else where I think they at least have the sight of to get to that level. It's in their crosshairs, I should say.
Yeah. Anybody have thoughts on that or comments on that? We've been talking about e-discovery for so long, and it's still. I mean, it's still such an interesting industry, and it's a part of the industry, and there's still so much going on. But it's
Zach, have you noticed any? I mean, any companies? I mean, you talked about how, it seems like these guys want to shoot for the moon. Have you noticed any other companies kind of taking that attitude as well? Besides these guys?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, about a week or two ago, Haystack ID was another one that had some M&A. At Disco has been well documented just with all of their funding and advertising everywhere and trying to pick up corporate clients in particular. I mean, that's where I think a lot of this is moving, honestly, is a lot of e-discovery starting to be insourced and staying within corporate legal departments. And a lot of e-discovery companies saying, hey, this is an emerging market that is kind of up for grabs. We want to be the one dominating there. So whether that continues, we'll see. But I find it interesting.
Yeah. Let's see. What else we got? Victoria, distributed firms are having their moment. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, and I think it definitely, with Utah's big decision that they announced earlier today, kind of because of 2020 being a year of change, especially in an industry that isn't really known for adopting change or embracing change. But my colleague at the American Lawyer, he wrote about some AmLaw 100 partners leaving their firms for some virtual law firms or decentralized law firms, as some people may like to call them. And he said one of the reasons is mainly because of the pay. And he mentioned one of the virtual law firms, Fisher Broyles. He reported that the firm's the partners are able to retain 80% of the fees from work they originate and handle themselves. And the law firm said that they're able to do that because they have smaller overhead compared to traditional law firms. So it'll kind of be interesting if we start seeing more of these high level junior associates or senior associates and partners leaving big law and going to these virtual law firms, and if that'll maybe at any point influence law firms and saying like, hey, maybe we need to change up what we're doing, especially with COVID-19. Some people just don't want to go back into the office. Kind of like, how will they kind of make sure that, oh, we're staying competitive and we could maybe even lower our own overhead by maybe not having so much office space. It'll be interesting to see like how that plays out, and if some big law attorneys continue like their exodus out of the traditional law firm for those virtual decentralized law firms.
Yeah, that's
so I actually have mentioned this. I've mentioned this on this show a while ago, I think, actually. It's just like a random aside.
We weren't listening.
Yeah, no, I didn't think you were.
I'm kidding.
But so in addition to working at Above the Law, I do some consulting work on the side with a legal recruiting company. And this is absolutely a trend that is happening. We've been putting on that hat, we've been placing tons of partners from large big law firms in these sorts of virtual firms. And a lot of the trend is that people have worked from home now and realize, wait a minute, I don't actually need to go into an office to do my real estate practice, for instance. All I do is talk on the phone. I can do it from home. I'm efficient at doing it home. And I could be getting upwards of 80, more likely 70 or whatever % of my of my returns, I can keep myself if I'm just willing to do it myself from home. And that's been a real boon. And the firms are taking advantage of it and people are listening, getting interview. I'm on the list as I'm a consultant, but I see like all the activity, and there are people from all the firms that you would consider the top elite places are all looking into this.
Yeah, and kind of like we always talk about, like lawyers have to become more efficient because of their clients, and now law firms have another motive, like they may lose talent when they're saying like, hey, like I understand I can't keep all my billables or the percentage of all the work that I'm making, and it's just kind of like, hey, do you guys need to still have that Midtown Manhattan, whatever, I guess that's a very expensive part of New York City office. It needs to be that large. If I like working from home and my clients are okay with me working from home because we're not seeing each other in person, but I'm still getting work done for them. So.
Victoria, I'm curious if you think so. We've seen this boutique startup, and thinking that was going to be a big disruption with huge practices moving out, striking out on their own, and were they going to be competing with big law? And we really didn't see that. We saw maybe a little business shift, but not enough to disrupt big law. But I'm curious because I'm still skeptical that would happen. I do think this strengthens that mid-level virtual firm, and for at least some sophisticated big company work, bet the company work, maybe. I still think they'd go to a big brand name law firm, but I do wonder if it will lead some of these firms to develop a model similar to Hush Blackwell, where they have that virtual, what are they calling it, the link practice group that works remotely, to give that option to partners so they don't lose talent.
Yeah, I think the hybrid kind of makes sense because they don't have to necessarily pay for all that real estate now. If they can say they give that option, you still have to have your billables and meet your billable goals and everything like that. But I can bring in the talent who likes that hybrid of having the flexibility of coming to the office or working remotely or just working 100% remotely. And I still get that talent and those billables. So I can see more law firms embracing like at least a hybrid. I don't see necessarily like the AM Law top 10 or whatever, just going fully virtual, of course, but I do think it kind of makes sense from a financial standpoint. If you just say like, hey, if we get a survey, if people say they're comfortable with working remotely at least half of the time or a hybrid, then maybe we can downside a little bit of our overhead by not having so much office space because people don't want to be in office. So I think you may start seeing a shift in that. And I know some of my colleagues, they've reported about law firms negotiating about their real estate space and kind of like maybe downsizing a little bit on that. So I think it's something that we will kind of see and then continue after 2020 is over.
And also, I mean, I think it also depends on what the clients want, because they're ultimately the ones that'll be calling the shots and kind of pushing law firms, even ones that may not be willing to adopt this kind of model. If enough of them are demanding it from their outside counsel, then they'll have to accommodate them. Because one thing that kind of struck me with that piece was that when you have a virtual model, you don't have to put associates on these projects. You can just put partners, and the partners can charge less because they don't have to kick up money to upstairs or anything like that. And most clients, what they want is they want predictability, and they want the best lawyers to be handling their stuff. And if they can get it for a bargain price, much less than what they were being charged beforehand, then I don't see why a client wouldn't want that. I mean, that's the dream for them. But one thing I thought was interesting about this piece as well was that when I was at ALM, we tracked the partner movement all the time, and during the Great Recession, we found that a lot of the partners at like the big top firms, like your Skaddens, your DLA Pipers, and your whatnot, like in certain practice areas like employment and some other ones, if they were under a lot of pressure to like lower their fees, but they couldn't do it under their structure at the firm, they would leave and go to either smaller firms or boutiques. So now if you have a virtual model, then that sets up an interesting kind of alternative for them, that they don't have to stay in that traditional kind of mold of either going to like a second 100 firm or regional powerhouse or starting their own boutique or whatnot. They can go to a big virtual firm, and they can still kind of have the structure that they're used to, while still being able to kind of set their fees and do what they want to do.
It feels like, oh, sorry. I was just going to say that one thing that Molly said about the boutiques and whether or not they were going to disrupt things, it strikes me that there are two vectors, two axes of disruption. And I think the boutiques did disrupt, but not big law. It disrupted the regional powerhouse mid-sized firm. As GCs started going, I can't not give this job to Skadden because I want to protect myself if it goes wrong. But then all the other work, they're like, why would I give this to AmLaw 170 when I can give this to a boutique? And then this idea, I think, is a axis of practice area. You're probably not going to a virtual firm for bet the company litigation, but discrete real estate deals, like all these practice areas that can be more discrete, are more likely to do well in a virtual format where associate workload is not as big a deal, where it is one and done sort of a thing. So it's going to disrupt along that vector, bringing up the question, maybe a law firm that has an imprint that is virtual is a way of holding on to that, because otherwise certain whole practice areas could move and be outside the big firm umbrella. I think of T&E as the biggest one. Like, a lot of big law firms don't understand why they still have T&E practices. If that becomes a new offshoot into this virtual world, that would make some sense.
Yeah, and one thing I'm struggling with around all this is why the traditional firms would ever go back to the office. I think it seems that all firms are going to be struggling with being virtual to some degree or another going forward. I don't think we're ever going to go back to the norm. And it certainly, we keep saying, oh, well, people are saying, well, by the fall, people will be going back to their office. And now fall is coming soon. And people are saying, well, by January, they'll probably be going back to the office. I don't know. I don't know when it's going to happen. And it seems that if instead of people, losing people to these virtual firms, the more established firms need to be reconfiguring their models to a virtual world. And that may stem this very tide that we're talking about right now, or this flow that we're talking about right now.
I think it depends on how much lawyers. Oh, yeah.
Well, my practical question is, I keep thinking about what it's like to be a real estate lawyer or agent right now.
Yeah.
For commercial real estate.
Right.
Most of these deals for these larger spaces are years in advance. So what you have this space, you've got to use it, or
Right.
what? You're not.
That's like the one argument to go back to the office
It's
is we got this space, you might as well use it.
Well,
well, right. Well, so then what do you do? I mean, you can renegotiate. I mean, I agree with you on a certain level, although I keep hearing that firms are going back full steam as usual, business as usual, and I'm kind of stunned to hear it.
I think it depends on how much lawyers like the people that they live with. I think that plays a bigger role in this than any of you are giving credit for.
No, I think it's interesting, though. I feel like at some point you're going to have some pushback from the traditional firms. My colleagues over at Legal Week in the UK reported Freshfields this week. They're moving into a new London office, and they put out this policy that said, hey, you can work virtually, that's fine. But if you do, you're not going to have an office to go back to. We're downsizing. We need to use all of our space. And my colleague over in the UK quoted some people saying, oh, hold up now. That's not exactly what we wanted. We like our physical space. We want the option. So it may be that in the future, they adopt that sort of model, but lawyers can't necessarily have their cake and eat it too. They might have to pick one or the other.
Right. Yeah. And Courtney Troutman points out that in South Carolina, they never closed, which I'm a little surprised at. But I mean, the firms never closed here. They never stopped practicing, but nobody's going into an office in Massachusetts. I don't know too many places where they're going into offices.
That was my question for Courtney. Yeah. What did, just because they didn't close and legal services was considered essential services, which it was in a lot of states, did they actually go? They didn't hear, even though legal is an essential service.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. What else do we have here? Joe, did you want to talk about your take on the Wall Street Journal's take on lawyer bots?
So the Wall Street Journal irritates me as a general matter. But in this case, the Wall Street Journal irritated me. They put out an article this week about do you trust robot lawyers? And I think a lot of us, this is a niche enough broadcast that everybody here has heard the robot lawyer scare stuff and isn't very frightened by it. But what bothers me about it is this is the mainstream media, and they're talking to the mainstream audience about how, oh, would you trust a robot lawyer to do whatever? And my issue is, it depends, which is the classic lawyer answer, right? That's what we all are told is the answer to every question. It depends. But I think that really doesn't come through in this article, and that's what really bothered me about it, which is, no, I wouldn't necessarily trust robots to do back to the example of the bet the company antitrust litigation. But that's not what I'm asking a robot to do. I'm asking robots to do different stuff that I would absolutely trust them to do. Whether it's something like Do Not Pay, where the robot is actually replacing your traffic court lawyer, basically, or a lot of the other examples that exist. That's the really sad thing, is I actually thought it was a really good piece as far as laying out the groundwork of what's out there. But its headline and angle were much more scary. But yeah, there's lots of places where artificial intelligence, not as magic beans, but as just a tool, has a huge impact, value to the profession. And so long as scaring people about it and treating it as though it can do these things that it can't, like replace lawyers, it hinders the adoption of the technology for tasks that it can do.
Yeah, it was a little bit of an alarmist. The writing, more than a headline, the piece was, the way it was written even was a little alarmist. The Do Not Pay is not doing bet the company litigation, that's for sure.
It still surprises me, and I haven't been covering legal tech for over 2 years, but it still surprises me when I hear legal professionals are scared about legal tech and taking their jobs. And listened to a University of Pennsylvania Law School webinar they had earlier this week, and they had a state judge from Michigan, and she said her colleagues, her fellow judges in Michigan, they were a little bit worried about implementing some type of legal tech because they thought that may take away from their job or take away from their caseload. And it's just like, wow, there really is fear. And I've heard that before, even in the UK, some of the, I guess, like solo practitioners over there, they're a little bit worried about some legal tech software being implemented over there because they think that can take away from their work. And it does kind of feed into that, but I do think there is like a genuine fear, at least from legal professionals and lawyers, that sometimes legal tech can maybe overstep and take away from their work and perhaps replace them. And it's still surprising for me to hear that from legal professionals.
Yeah, I mean, it came up today, and this panel that I was talking about earlier today. But this group of professional responsibility lawyers, and it came up in the discussion around what's going on in Utah with lawyers saying, "Look, these kinds of changes in regulatory, in legal regulation, are going to wipe out solo and small firm lawyers because Amazon and Walmart are going to be doing all the legal work, and there won't be any more small firm lawyers." Which is, again, just a complete misunderstanding of both of the nature of the access to justice gap in this country and of the nature of the solutions that can be developed under a program like this.
I think Joe's piece pulls out the piece and points out nicely that, there's a difference in having a bot do lawyering and a bot and an algorithm help screen and direct people to the right place that's the most useful for them. And there's incredible value in that. And partly because, well, mainly from my perspective, because none of that is happening now. And so much of the public is missing out on proper access to the judiciary and the justice system. And there's no reason that the courts at a basic level or libraries or anywhere that has a public portal, access to a portal, shouldn't be able to give this access to people, to have these abilities to screen, to find the right documents, to get tutorials on how to file, at least some of this transactional work at a minimum, let alone law firms and others using this as a way to triage or route cases to the right lawyers, to the right team, and get better solutions for their clients.
And also, I mean, I think robots are, they're scary. Like they're, I mean, I didn't read the whole editorial, but I saw the illustration of like, the robot sitting on the witness stand with a suit and tie, and like, he didn't look as menacing as they could have made him, or it, I don't even know what his gender. They could, but because to kind of illustrate this point a little bit. I remember one time I think I was at a lecture at Tech Show, and Ed Walters was taking all the journalists to task for making robots so scary because they always draw like, these Terminators or like these, cyborgs with like, the exposed exoskeletons or whatnot, practicing law, and it scares people. And I think I think the article he was pointing at was actually one of mine at the time. And I'm like, hey, I didn't draw it. I can't draw. I can't draw anything. But they're a convenient target, and there's something that people don't fully understand. People get like either because they watch too many movies or they watch too much TV or whatnot. The idea of like a robot handling this stuff can be scary for people. But I think one thing that people don't really get about the law is that a lot of it is templated. A lot of it is predictable. A lot of it is just rote paperwork and memorization and all this stuff. And that can easily be done by a machine. I mean, it can be done much better, much more efficiently and much quicker. And, you don't end up getting charged like for a whole hour when a machine can do it in like, a few minutes or seconds. So, I mean, as far as that goes, like what Joe was saying, yeah, of course you want AI to take care of it. You want a robot to take care of it. But you're not going to be hiring a robot to like come up with the next Twinkie defense for you if you're on trial for your life. You're not going to do that.
Yeah. To Molly's point about access to justice, now I will jump from that to Victor's point about like you wouldn't pay the full hour. People don't talk about how these robots might increase the amount of work that happens, in that I think there are a lot of people with legal needs who say, I can't afford a lawyer. And maybe it's because they don't have a case, or maybe they do, but if they can go somewhere for relatively free, type it in and find out whether they do, that will make more work. There are people who will type into this, this thing happened to me, ask some more questions, probe some more, ding, ding, ding. This actually is a case. Go ahead and call a lawyer. They'll take it on contingency. Like whatever it is, like this could lead to more people who would otherwise never begin to engage the legal system, engaging the legal system.
And, I think the other point, the other point that needs to be made is that a lot of these, and I think we've talked about this before, but a lot of these bots that are being developed are being developed to do things that lawyers would never be doing in the first place. We're not talking about bots substituting or standing in for lawyers. I mean, the do not pay is a great example of that. Very few people are going to go hire a lawyer over a parking ticket or something like that because it isn't cost effective. I was just writing, as a matter of fact, this just reminded me that I forgot to post it. I just posted a post as we've been talking here about this competition that was just done among law students to develop some bots around access to justice. And like one of them is a DOT complaint generator for people who've had to allow people to apply for flight refunds for flights that were canceled due to COVID-19. I mean, no lawyer, I mean, that's a legal problem maybe, or justice problem maybe. I mean, how you define the justice gap is kind of goes a lot into how you think about this, but there are a ton of problems out there that are arguably legal problems, but that you would never go to a lawyer for.
Yeah, I call those particular programs Karen bots because that's what they do, right? They like reach out to people and complain to the manager. That's not really a legal thing, but it is still a get what you want thing.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. All right. Apparently that struck but that's what I think of them as, right?
No,
that's
I
really
it.
what they're doing.
Yeah. Right.
I don't like my bill.
We as legal tech journalists can all agree to adopt that nomenclature now, right?
Right.
Karen bot.
You should copyright that, Joe, while you have a chance.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, this is, if only this were being recorded somewhere. Hashtag Karen bot is me.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, good. So I think in this program, we've agreed to get rid of E in e-discovery, and now we've got a new word for low-level consumer bots, I guess, Karen bots. All right, so let's see. We have Victor had did you want to talk? We got a story on some new facial recognition tech. You want to talk about that?
I just thought it was interesting how, this in Pasadena, I guess they're rolling out this facial recognition program to help streamline payments. And, that sort of, I thought it was interesting that they're doing that while law enforcement and companies that produce like facial recognition for law enforcement purposes are pulling back their use of facial recognition and whatnot. And I thought it was interesting that just that contrast, that kind of like now, you kind of look at it, well, okay, from a business standpoint, it makes sense. That way you don't have to touch someone's cash, you don't have to touch someone's credit card, you don't have to do any of that stuff. You can just take the picture and then, charge them later. It makes perfect sense. But, obviously then, you still have all the same problems that you have with facial recognition in general, that, they misidentify many people, especially, if they're of darker shade, like if they're African-American, if they're women. But, on the other hand, you can see how this would solve a problem, especially now with COVID, where people are, like where you don't want to touch anybody, you don't want to make any contact with anyone, and you want to just get in, get out, and just be done with it. So I just thought it was interesting just how, like, this is being rolled out at a time when, facial recognition is coming under scrutiny, but for law enforcement purposes, not so much for business purposes.
Yeah, I thought the story. Go ahead.
Yeah, I thought for that reason that it when you shift from law enforcement to consumer, that's a whole different mindset. I thought it was interesting that it's also it's in California, right?
Pasadena, yeah.
Right, which has really been leading the charge against facial recognition for law enforcement. So it's really, I thought that was interesting. I also thought that one of the use cases that they talked about in that story that you sent around, Victor, was contact tracing.
Yeah.
But so that would be a totally different ballgame. I think that would create a different issue.
I was just surprised that the story I'm like thinking, how did the editor let this story go out without anybody ever at least addressing the privacy issue? It's not in there anywhere. I didn't see. Like, you would have think somebody would have at least addressed, this is not a privacy problem because, or maybe this could be a privacy problem because. I just thought it was. I was just surprised that the story never even touched on that.
Well, it kind of goes back to what we talked about. I think, was it last week or the week before, where if it's something that makes your life easier and something that you like and potentially could save you, however, whatever you value, time, social touching, whatnot, then you're willing to kind of let go a lot of these things.
Screw privacy.
Whereas, like, whereas if it's in a criminal sense, like, well, then all kinds of protections come in, all kinds of individual rights, all kinds of do you have the right to do this to me, that kind of stuff. Your freedom's at stake, your liberty. So yeah, I mean, I do think there's that aspect of it. Well, I think as far as business goes, you're seeing a lot of like stadiums start to use it. You're seeing a lot of like airports start to use it. You're seeing a lot of these other things, these other entities and businesses use them, and they promise to like make your consumer experience much more convenient and much more simple. And for some people, that is worth giving up a little bit of their civil liberties, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and definitely during COVID-19, I kind of wonder, will some more people just in general want to just say, hey, maybe do less person-to-person interactions, especially with someone I don't know, but I still need to purchase something. So using that facial recognition, that's something. And I always kind of wonder, like, if you're using it in a private sector space, if you still run into those issues where, okay, a Black person tried to buy something and the facial recognition just wouldn't pick up, it kept having trouble. Does that put even more pressure on the company to say, hey, I implemented this technology to have efficiency and not have these issues, and now I have that. So does that put a little bit more pressure, or maybe to say, let's go for a software that's actually more accurate, or let's do more research? I don't know if that actually plays out. Maybe that's kind of being naive, but I kind of wonder, do you have that in like a private sector? Like if you're having those issues with accuracy, that you'll say, okay, we need to look for something that is more accurate. So.
Well, and I think that along that point, Victoria, is that for me, I think that's a great observation, that the company would fail if it doesn't continue to improve. So if it's having problems and it should be improving its technology, it's either address those issues that you mentioned, or it will have to very quickly address them, or there's no purpose in using it.
Right. Yeah. Market demand will drive those kinds of improvements, or market use. Molly, did you have anything you wanted to talk about this week? I know you were kind of on vacation.
I was, yeah. So mine is on this topic area, which is whether people will trust enough in contact tracing to embrace it. And I'm still kind of amazed at how it's like we have this very loose network of volunteer contact tracers, even though we know that from countries that have managed to get a lot of their COVID cases under control and open up more quickly, that they have a mix of contact tracing, testing, and mask wearing. We've just had such a major issue with it. So I'm intrigued. My son is getting ready to go up to college, and one of their requirements there is for contact tracing, or not. It's one of the things they're doing as part of the reopening plan is doing contact tracing. And what they've done is enabled their Wi-Fi to have certain spots that ping them. And so if you test positive for COVID, it will immediately identify which areas you've been where you've had the likelihood of infecting someone else, a greater likelihood. So it can help with the contact tracing much more quickly, so that then they would, presumably do rapid testing or recommend quarantines or something for those areas. But I'm seeing so much pushback for contact tracing, and every news article I read about, I guess some states, according to the one I circulated, I'll post it in a minute, but some some states are starting to see more progress in getting people to cooperate. But I think we talked about a few weeks ago that New York had to sue or threaten arrest for people who refused to give up the names of people who were at their party where COVID broke out. So it's in the U.S. there's a major issue with privacy and suspicion. Conspiracy theories, the contact tracers are being abused on the phone by people who don't want to give up their information or tell about their friends, and they feel like they're being they're part of some kind of vast conspiracy.
Yeah, it was wild to me. So my wife's brother currently lives in China, has been living in China for the past 2 years, teaching English abroad. And obviously, when this first broke out, he was quarantined. And we were talking to him in April when everything was really starting to flare up here. And he said, "Oh, so how's it over there?" And he said, "Well, it's kind of under control right now." He whips out his phone, shows us his app, and says, "So I've been tested. They come to my apartment. They test me every other day. And every time I test negative, they upload it to my phone. And I'm allowed to go outside now and just show this app. And it lets me buy whatever I want. I'm good." So I'm like, "Oh, that's crazy. I wonder if something like that will get rolled out in the US." But then, yeah, after thinking about it for about 30 more seconds, no, something like that will never be rolled out in the US because people would just have too much trust issues about what exactly the government is doing with that data, some of which are probably well-founded, some of which maybe not. Also, just people not wanting to abide by that sort of rule. It's an interesting question. I forget who said it earlier with the last topic of values, just who values what and what takes precedence within a society. It'd be interesting to see something like that be rolled out here, but just it never would catch on a uniform scale.
Yeah, I mean, one of my guilty pleasures is watching, since Joe mentioned it, watching Karen videos on Instagram, and it's just every other video is like a woman or a man going into like a Walmart or a store and just being accosted by security because they refuse to wear masks. And I never realized how many people in this country suffered from like debilitating asthma or some form of some mysterious illness that makes it so they can't wear masks. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's one thing for a college or a university to kind of condition your attendance on taking part in contact tracing, because obviously if you want to go there, then you have to play by their rules and whatnot. But to do it on like such a wide scale with everybody in this country and just the mindset that we have, I just feel like that would be that would lead to very bad things.
Well, it's not just people in Walmart. I mean, here's another headline from Above the Law this week. Judge reportedly refuses to wear mask, orders lawyers to remove theirs as well. So,
yeah, it's unbelievable. And we talk about that in this week's Thinking Like a Lawyer, which will come out on Tuesday. But we talk about that story. And we also, yeah, exactly. And then we also have there was the woman who is a lawyer who showed up at court with COVID. Well, she did not have COVID. She tested negative, but she'd been living with somebody with COVID, and she'd been told by the court, "Don't show up." And then she did. And, then they had that issue. And it's a breakdown in a lot of different jurisdictions.
Yep.
Yeah. So with that, so Victor, we're also seeing, I can't remember which reporter, somebody just set out a call for sources that I saw on Twitter. So I'm sure we'll see this, but a lot of the restaurants here, I don't know in your areas if they're doing it, but they're requiring a phone number if you sit in their restaurant or in one of their spaces, and it's for them to do contact tracing. So it's interesting to me that the private institutions and businesses are starting to do it more and more, and governments are starting to do it to a certain extent with volunteers leading the way. So you can volunteer as a contact tracer. There's just the Bloomberg article that I shared talks about one of the major hurdles for contact tracing is a lack of funding and resources.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to a close. Anything else anybody want to raise before we wrap up? I forgot to mention the two of our regulars are off on vacation this week, but Nikki Black wasn't here this week and Caroline Hill wasn't here this week. They're both off on staycations or some kind of close by vacations.
I would like to think that our viewers recognize that just from the pictures.
Well, but we have some new viewers this week, so
I guess that's fair. That's fair.
For those who are not regular consumers of our show here, we hope they'll come back next week, and that's so I want to tantalize them with the fact that there will be even more talking heads next week.
Indeed.
Yes. And we will be back next week, same time, same place. And if you've registered for this, then you're good for next week. You don't have to re-register. You'll get a reminder about a day before. And we hope to see you back next week. And as for all of you guys, thanks a lot again, and hope you all have a good weekend.
Thank
Have
you.
a nice
Thank you all.
weekend, guys.
Bye, everybody.